Hi, welcome to another episode of A Closer Look. I'm Donna Giroux, the Executive Director at CATV, and with me today, I'm very happy to have Andru Volinsky, a progressive New Hampshire gubernatorial candidate and Concord attorney, serving, I think, your second term as an active counselor on the New Hampshire Executive Council.
That's right, District 2.
Did I get that?
Yes, you got it right.
Your accomplishments just exhaust me. I'm sorry. So
I'm tired.
Imagine. So one of the reasons, Closer Look is a show where we just take a peek at something, just hyper focus on something. And because the primary, the Democratic primaries are September 9th.
8th.
And, oh, it's the 8th? Okay. Tuesday the 8th. Ooh, I'm glad you said that. So you then are directly going head-to-head with Dan Feltz. Is that his last name?
It's 2 syllables, Feltus.
Feltus. And he's the majority leader of the New Hampshire Senate.
That's
and right. So, you know, a lot of people probably don't know the points of difference between the two of you. So I thought if we talk some questions, perhaps as you're answering the questions, you can tell us the difference between the two candidates.
Sure.
Okay. So first, I was wondering, you have gotten some resounding endorsements, including the Concord Monitor, I believe, and this New Hampshire Sierra Club.
The Monitor endorsed me in both executive council races. They have not started their endorsement process for the gubernatorial yet.
Well, when I was researching, talking to you, the things that the Monitor said about you were amazing. It made me feel confident that you had great integrity, intellectual curiosity, attention to detail, all the things you wanted from an executive council member. But I do want to talk about the Sierra Club.
Yeah.
Because you have like a strong environmental advocacy. I don't want to focus on the Granite Bridge fracked pipeline as much as the possibility of, if you become governor, promoting a clean energy bill, advancing the economy, you know, any of these bills, it's all about the economy and protecting the public health and the environment at the same time. So I'm curious of your opinion on it.
So let me push back a little bit. I think you do have to start with the large infrastructure projects, because the first step in dealing with climate change is stopping or mitigating the bad things that are happening. The current governor, Chris Sununu, hasn't met a pipeline project he didn't like. My opponent in the primary supports the same Granite Bridge fracked gas pipeline project that Chris Sununu does. So there's no point of contrast there, which makes it hard to complain about Sununu if you support the same project. I'm the only one in this race that opposes the construction of the fracked gas pipeline. I also should mention that I opposed the Northern Pass project, which was an electrical transmission project that would have taken down mountaintops and despoiled the North Country all the way down to Deerfield, New Hampshire. It's an Eversource project. Chris Sununu takes tons of campaign money from Eversource. He's the governor from Eversource. He supported the project. I actually, as a lawyer, represented some of the families opposed to the project. So I was very active there. My opponent in the primary didn't take a position on the Northern Pass. Kind of hard to ignore that process. So I think you start there. I think you and I may have something in common in that we're both new grandparents.
Oh, really? Congratulations.
I have our second grandchild 8 weeks ago. We've yet to hold him because he lives in Denver. But I admit that when I think of climate change and the environment, I do it through the lens of a grandfather. And I worry about the future we're leaving our children and our children's children. So no to infrastructure projects, no to fossil fuel money, which skews the campaign process. But then we need to start thinking about the good things we can do. So I'm a big fan of a regional Green New Deal. I think the northern New England states are too small to accomplish things by themselves on a lot of fronts. And this is a perfect opportunity for Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine to team up and get some things done. I also have, there's an office in New Hampshire state government that is completely controlled by the governor. The current governor just uses it as a catch-all and dumps various unrelated projects there. I would take over this office within the first 30 days of my administration and make it the Agency for Climate, Energy, and the Environment. And I would give it the responsibility to create a citizen-informed plan to make New Hampshire state government carbon neutral by 2030. And that's more than the typical environmental programs. I think they need to work with the Department of Education. New Hampshire school buildings, a lot of them are 40 and 50 years old, and they're going to need to be refurbished or replaced. That's a real opportunity for conservation, for solar panels on any school that can do it. We need to think that broadly along every aspect of state government.
So for the marginalized person who just can barely keep things together, it sounds like it would be more taxes, but I feel like this might be a way to save money in the long
Yeah, it's not, that's a simple approach that doesn't apply here, particularly when you're talking about alternative energy. There are financing mechanisms available that allow you to do solar and, where it's appropriate, wind and offshore wind in a way that you negotiate power purchase agreements using someone else's money to start the project. You pay off the project over the first half a dozen or so years, and then your energy supply comes in almost without cost. So it's not a burden on taxes. We can talk about other things that relate to taxes, but the smart way to do clean energy doesn't involve more costs for particularly working class people. The other thing is that we need to have programs that allow working class folks to participate in clean energy. New Hampshire has a number of mobile home parks. The legislature passed a couple of pilot projects last term that allowed for solar to be developed as part of community net metering, if you know what that is. We need to do more of that, but we also need, Sununu has vetoed a bill to repeal the cap on net metering projects. The way to advance solar and net metering is to bring it to utility scale. And right now, New Hampshire can't do that because there's a 5 megawatt cap on solar net metering in New Hampshire. We need to do away with that.
And his justification for the cap, I'm sorry, I was familiar with what was going on, but not his reasoning for.
I am not sure there is a coherent reason to have the cap other than Eversource doesn't want to deal with solar net metering. And Sununu listens to Eversource. It's that simple. You know, let me add one statistic to show you the difference between our states. I think Vermont gets 12% of its power from solar. New Hampshire gets 1%.
And the reason you're telling me this, for those who, we're going to pass this show to other area New Hampshire public access media centers, is CATV uniquely in the country actually contracts with both Vermont and New Hampshire towns. So we're right there on the edge of the two states. So we always have an interesting point where we can compare the two states just in the way they conduct business. So yeah, it's a little disappointing. Also, New Hampshire, they didn't join a New England alliance when Trump got out of the Paris, was it?
Paris Accord. Paris Agreement, Accord. Yes.
I was going to say Paris Peace Accord, but that's another one. Okay.
Yeah.
So all the surrounding states participate in this alliance. So your idea to go ahead and work with Maine and Vermont and try to create an energy plan or an environmental plan is compelling. I think.
New Hampshire, it's actually worse than you're saying. New Hampshire is the only state in New England and the Northeast whose who has not signed on to the U.S.-based, state-based Paris Agreement. We're such an outlier in that regard. The other thing is we're part of the New England power grid. So everyone, as a practical matter, works through power on a New England-wide basis. It makes perfect sense that we think about clean energy on a similar basis.
Right, as opposed to being an outlier. I know live free or die, but the bottom line is there's a stubbornness where you think that it might not be in people's best interests. So I was wondering if we could talk about, I guess, just to finish that up is, I understand the difference between you and the governor on this issue, but your direct opponent right now in the primaries, he was receiving money from energy, big energy as well. And is that why he's silent on this issue, or?
Actually, he signed on to be a supporter of the Granite Bridge fracked gas pipeline project. He's listed on the Liberty Utilities website and has been. And then they contributed to him. And
so that's a main differentiator between the two of you.
That was a determining point for the Sierra Club. And they gave him a number of opportunities to back off that position, and he refused. And so it's not just the Sierra Club, the Sunrise movements, the New Hampshire Youth Climate Strike, a number of others have endorsed me because of my climate change positions.
So competitors will say, I'm sorry, I don't mean to hang on this, but competitors will position it where the economically marginalized will not have winter heat. You know, like, oh my gosh, you're not going to have heat. You know, is that a realistic claim? I mean,
I think the technical answer is it's BS.
Oh, okay, good. I like that technical. I love technical answers.
As a matter of fact, in reviewing the Granite Bridge project, the Public Utilities Commission staff had to review whether New Hampshire has enough natural gas capacity with and without that project. And they concluded we're just fine. There's no need for this project. It's a profit point for the shareholders of Liberty Utilities. New Hampshire poor people, working people, middle-class people don't need this project. And worse, if it's built, those same folks that they're talking about protecting will pay for it for 20 or 30 years in their rates. It makes no sense.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right. I promise I'll move on to another topic,
okay,
although they're all interrelated. I always find it interesting, you know, some voters, they'll just say, I don't want to know all the issues. I just want to vote for the guy who's not going to raise my taxes. This is sort of a senior mentality. I can't afford any more taxes. So out comes these tax pledges, which are just sort of like, hey, I'm going to put you against the wall, and then I'm going to complain if you back off your pledge. So let's talk about that. What do you make of pledges to not raise taxes?
So let's take a running start at that question, if it's okay.
Please.
I was the Claremont school funding lawyer. I organized the lawsuit over how poorly New Hampshire funds its schools and how uneven the quality is. And that lawsuit resulted in the New Hampshire Supreme Court, for the first time ever in history, recognizing the right to a state-funded public education as a constitutional right.
That was recent, right?
1993 is when it was recognized. Yeah. Okay. In constitutional history, that's very recent, you know, but it was, you know, a number of years ago, 27 years ago. So when I think about pledges, it starts with my deep knowledge of how badly New Hampshire has been served by this 1973 pledge developed by the union leader, editor Bill Loeb, and the then hard right conservative governor Mel Thompson, never to raise taxes, never even to talk about taxes. And what it's done is it's kept the state from meeting its constitutional responsibility to fund education. And as a result, what was a small problem during the time of Claremont in the 90s now affects 3/4 of the kids in our state. 3/4 of the children in our state live in communities with below average property values. And when you rely as heavily as New Hampshire does, we're the highest property taxers in the nation. When you rely that heavily, the difference in property values is horrendous. So a guy like Mitt Romney, who lives on the lake, pays about $7 in his tax rate. A teacher in Manchester pays twice as much. Someone who's between jobs in Claremont pays 3 to 4 times as much as Mitt Romney. So I'm about having people pay their fair share, and you can't force that part of the discussion. If you take this pledge, Mel Thompson's pledge, that's really a promise to fail. It's a chain to the past. It's the kind of thing where you act in state government like your budget is balanced and everything's cool, but really all you've done is downshift those costs to the local communities, and they can't afford to pay them in many places. So under Chris Sununu, he's now running for a third term. In his first 2 terms, property taxes in New Hampshire went up by $320 million, more than at any other time in our state's history. And if he's reelected, he'll do more of the same by downshifting costs and gobbling up revenues that belong to municipalities. And so I won't take that pledge. We actually revealed our own pledge. Our pledge is not to balance state government on the backs of the local property taxpayer and to achieve a decrease in property taxes for the majority of New Hampshire residents.
Well, that's a different pledge. And can you repeat that last part one more time? Because that's going to affect people.
Our pledge is not to balance state government on the backs of local property taxpayers and to reduce local property taxes for the majority of New Hampshire citizens.
So if you're reducing, so is that sort of a call to the rich that they're going to, or the people who are avoiding paying their share of taxes? Is that what, like, where are you getting the money from if you're not downshifting costs to the communities?
Yeah, it's time that everyone in New Hampshire paid their fair share. We have some very well-off people who live here year-round, who have summer homes here, who come to our state to visit. It's time that you paid your fair share for New Hampshire's education, for New Hampshire's future, is really what it's about. What we're doing now is not sustainable.
So how do I know whether I'm paying my fair share? You know, like I might be my family might be earning, a double earner might be making $200,000 a year. You feel like you're being taxed out of the yin yang, and you don't know whether you're.
Yeah.
Does this candidate believe I'm paying my fair share?
Yeah, I don't think there's that much ambiguity.
Okay.
If you're a well-off person, when you go to your tax advisor, you know how many tax loopholes you have exploited, and you know that you've chosen to buy a big expensive house in a particular community because you know the tax rates are low. If you can afford the price of admission to live on the lake in New Hampshire, to live on our small seacoast, to live in a community with a ski hill, you've done that with the tax rates in mind, and you know it. And if you live in Claremont, you know how badly you're being taken advantage of.
Yeah. Yeah. So education. So it doesn't seem like, it seems like New Hampshire still has a very long way to go on education, even winning that lawsuit. Do you have any comments about the education system?
Yeah, I do. I think that requesting, convincing the Supreme Court to recognize the constitutional right was a bold idea, but for lack of courageous leadership, the promise of Claremont has not been fulfilled. We have We have high schools in New Hampshire without chemistry teachers. The Pittsfield School District doesn't have any foreign language teachers. Berlin closed its last elementary school last summer. We have places that won't allow affordable housing to be built because they're afraid that will bring young families with children and that will drive up school costs. So think about it. How do you build a thriving community if you're afraid to have children come to your community? So we need to address all of that. We need to address the concerns of seniors who are afraid of being priced out of their homes, not because they bought too much, but because the property tax goes up. The property tax is like a second mortgage that always goes up and you can't pay it off. And that's scary to people. We need to bring that under control.
That is. I know personally my property taxes cost as much monthly as my mortgage.
Yeah.
So I'm feeling that. So,
I'm sorry.
No, it is what it is. It's decisions each person makes. So so do you favor New Hampshire considering either an income or a sales tax? You're not taking that pledge. You've said that you don't want you're trying to reduce property taxes. Well, money has to come from somewhere, or spending has to be different. So what do you think about an income or sales tax? I know it's hard to, I'm sorry for this question.
Oh, no, you shouldn't be. This is a fair question. My approach is every option's on the table. The governor has to work with whoever's elected to the legislature. The legislature will pass the appropriate revenue laws. I have to be able to work with them. So I'm taking nothing off the table. All have pluses and minuses. You've mentioned income and sales tax. There's also a statewide property tax where you increase the rates in the very low taxing communities and decrease the rates everywhere else. There are other options that we don't even talk about. New Hampshire is the only state in the region that has not legalized marijuana for adult use. Vermont, Mass, Maine, Canada, it's all legal and it's all being taxed. New Hampshire needs to legalize marijuana and tax it. There are other options that get discussed from time to time in the legislature. We need to be courageous enough to bring those options forward and have an adult, mature discussion that's based on the proposition that everyone contributes fairly. We need to reduce the overall local property tax burden. And what it comes down to is if you want nice things, you have to pay for them. And investing in education and in roads and bridges and in mental health and in physical health systems are really important for our state to continue to grow. And we haven't done that in decades. And so it's time to do that.
So we're New Hampshire is second oldest right now behind Maine, population-wise. I'm sorry. This happens to be a day that our dear president is coming to New Hampshire for a rally. And I noticed the governor, for whatever reason, is not going to participate in that. I think that's an intelligent thing because it's potentially dangerous. So there's all these conspiracy theories around that this isn't an important important to the public health as it really is. Well, I'm talking about the pandemic. So it comes down to, are you pro-mask?
Well,
or are you anti-mask?
So before we go to mask,
okay.
Trump's visit, if I were governor, I would tell him that he's unwelcome, that he's a public health risk, and New Hampshire is not a photo op. Stay away. So I start there.
Oh, that's pretty bold. I know some of the governors are like, sure, you can come here, but you have to adhere to our rules. You have to socially distance and wear a mask.
Yeah, but the people who show up at his rallies won't do that. So, and the reason, in part, the reason they won't do that is because he encourages them not to do that. So I say, just stay away. You're a viral vector, is how I think of the president these days.
So that's not a political, that you're on two sides of theory. You're talking about just health. This is why you would.
Yeah, I disagree with him on so many political and policy issues, but I think he's coming to New Hampshire from Miami-Dade County.
Yikes, which is really a viral hotbed right now.
Right. So please don't come. If you want to come, you can quarantine for 14 days before you go out in public. So you asked about masks. Almost 8 weeks ago, I asked the governor, because we meet every other Wednesday, essentially, with the executive council and governor. I asked him directly to his face, will you please issue an order that requires the wearing of a mask or a facial covering at public indoor venues, period. Because of the public health considerations. And the governor said to me that the public health science does not support the effectiveness of wearing a mask. That is an untrue statement. I think there is pretty clear consensus that if 80% of us wore masks in public, in private, in indoor spaces, that would shut down this virus. And it is inexcusable, in my opinion, that we won't show concern for our neighbors enough to wear a mask. So I think we should have a mask wearing requirement in our state. And I'm disappointed that the governor's playing games with the science on the issue.
So what would you say to the person who listens to this and says, my civil liberties, it's all about my liberty?
Grow up.
Okay, all right.
It's about caring for your neighbor. You know, I don't know who I'm encountering when I go to the grocery store who has a compromised immune system. I don't know who's related to someone who's just coming off of cancer treatment. The least I can do is put a piece of paper across my face. There is no bad effect on me when I wear that piece of paper across my face. Yeah, maybe I'm a little warmer. Maybe it's a little less comfortable, but I'm confident enough in who I am that I can go out with a piece of paper on my face and not in any way feel slighted or feel like my constitutional liberties are in any way undermined. Look, I was general counsel for the ACLU in New Hampshire for about a half a dozen years. There is no constitutional right to have your face show in public.
Interesting. Okay. I like that you're really definitive about it. I'm sure people, the elderly who are still worried about walking outside will be thrilled. Because CATV is on two sides of the Connecticut River, my normal shopping experience would be to take advantage of the New Hampshire grocery stores. But because there's so little mask wearing, a lot of us are fleeing to the Vermont side and giving revenue to Vermont. I just hate doing it because I don't want to be next to a couple in the produce section where I'm only 3 feet away from them because the stores are not that big. So I feel like New Hampshire, at least along the border, is losing money because of this.
Can I ask you a question? One of the things Sununu did early on is he issued an order that you can no longer bring your own grocery bags to the grocery store. You have to use those awful plastic bags.
I think there's been a shift, though, because when I go to the Shaws in West Lebanon, I think they let you have your bag, but that's in Vermont. They'll let you have your recycled bag, but they will not touch it.
Yeah.
You have to pack your own groceries, and they won't let your bag touch the runway. You have to put it in a basket. And so your bags are in the basket and you pack your stuff. And this way it limits the exposure that you might be providing to the seniors. I think it's a pretty good system because less garbage. Because if you think about all the disposable masks, gloves, and bags that the whole world is producing right now, I keep thinking, oh my gosh, the landfills are going to be.
Yeah. I'm not a fan of the plastic bags. From the outset, we just have had the grocery store clerks put the goods back in our carriage, push it out to the truck, and then we put it in our bags and load it.
Like BJ's.
Yeah.
That's how Costco and BJ's works usually, you know.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
So, see, you know, for those of us shopping for cost, you know, I run a nonprofit. You know, I'm going to be saving my nickels. You know, we don't get paid very well.
I get it.
Okay, so so if you ever want to know a mom perspective on trying to nickel and dime it, please call me. So I'm curious, because you're the attorney in this landmark Claremont school funding lawsuit. How would you change the education funding in New Hampshire, knowing that you are going to examine the physical buildings and try to make them more energy efficient? I'm just curious about education in general.
Yeah. So
the funding, sorry.
73% of education funding in New Hampshire comes from the local property tax. That's way too high. That's New Hampshire's 50th in the nation in terms of state support for K-12 education. So that means we're the most heavily reliant on the local property tax. And so the way to address it is to reduce the reliance, to build a state fund that then gets distributed to the schools in a fair way so that the vagaries of property values are less important. You know, New Hampshire has the lakes region with the beautiful lakes and the high value properties. You can't get there unless you drive on the roads that everyone else pays for. So all I'm saying is the people who live in those fancy homes need to contribute a little bit more. You know, for Mitt Romney, it's a rounding error. And we need to pick up those rounding errors and reduce the heavy over-reliance on the local property tax and replace it with a state source of funding, because as our Constitution says, it's a right to a state-funded public education, not a locally funded public education.
Sharing, so the more deprived towns get a better education, so that everyone shares in the. Yep.
And so that they don't also have taxes that are so high that businesses can't start or expand them. I mean, in your area, the difference between Lebanon and Claremont is day and night.
It is.
And the difference in taxes is Claremont's tax rate is about twice that of Lebanon's, and it shows.
It does. So I'm a big proponent. I spoke with the Northeast Regional Director of the federal 2020 census. And if anybody's watching this and haven't taken the census, it is the easiest thing to do. It'll take maybe 2 minutes online. And what they're also doing is going door to door, which sounds unfortunate for those who, haven't put in their census. It's such an important thing to do because it's going to affect, of course, federal funding and school systems and your utilities, basically federal contributions to your state. So this election, the very fact that we're having a gubernatorial election seems really important, because after this election cycle, whoever is in power will influence the redistricting process that follows the census. Is that, I don't know enough about redistricting. Is that on a federal level, or is that on a state, or basically it's, no holds barred, it affects everything political?
Yeah, so redistricting is done after the census is completed. So every 10 years based on the new census data. And so each state, I'm pretty sure Vermont is similar to New Hampshire. It's a legislative function to fairly draw political boundaries for districts based on the census data. You assume the census data is accurate and it says where people live. In New Hampshire, there's been a terrible problem with gerrymandering. The Republicans were in control in 2011 after the last census and drew a crazy quilt of Senate and Executive Council and in some instances, House seats to gain a really unfair advantage. Last legislative session, the legislature put forward an independent redistricting commission that would not be political and would recommend a map that fairly protected everyone's interest. And then the legislature could either adopt it or not, but they'd have to do some real explaining if they rejected it. Sununu vetoed it. There's still time to get that through with the next election. I would sign that bill in a heartbeat. I have a long history as a voter protection lawyer. I've done that kind of work for 20 years in New Hampshire's hottest hotspots, Dartmouth and UNH, and in court on the Obama campaign. So I get the implications of this, and I would really work hard to support and advance an independent redistricting commission.
So the governor has only that impact on it, correct? Encourage the legislature to take it up and then to veto it or approve it.
Yes.
So it's really, we're talking about, because obviously you're running for governor, but it's really, it can stall in the legislature.
It's the legislative function subject to some very modest review by the Supreme Court.
And if you happen to be watching this, your census, if you have a second home in New Hampshire, they expect you, the census wants you to submit for your primary home as well as your secondary home so that they better understand, they have questions that ask you so that they really are accounting for every single home in the country. So this is a good thing. I'm glad that I was able to bring that up. Basically, as an executive council member, one of your functions is to approve or turn down governors, State Department appointees, and judicial appointees. Right. And most recently, it just felt like it was really disingenuous, so I think it's worth bringing up, was that the New Hampshire, you voted down a Board of Education nomination, Ryan Terrell of Nashua. And it was interesting because it was a nomination of someone who would be working with the Board of Education and had zero experience. And it became zero experience with education. And he's admitted that as much, had never been on the PTA or volunteered in a school or worked with a school board. So it just seemed like an odd, politically based nomination. And there was some backlash to you. So could you talk to us about perhaps the backlash and your impression of it?
Yeah, so let's create some context.
Please.
So 5 of the 7 State Board of Education members come from particular districts. This happens to be the seat from the Nashua-based district. That executive counselor is Deborah Pignatelli. The State Board of Education supervises the Commissioner of Education, as well as has a number of other very technical, detailed functions to hold hearings, to pass regulations, things of that nature. It's a place where Sununu has stacked the deck to let Frank Edelblue, who's New Hampshire's Betsy DeVos, let's be clear on that. He wants to undermine public education, and he does it by shifting public money to private schools. He needs to be supervised. And yet the governor has stacked the deck at the Board of Education with people who support Edelblue. And this gentleman, who happens to be Black, Ryan Terrell, is just another one of those appointees. I interviewed him in length. He, as you say, had no experience with school systems, never even volunteered, never even a mentor or a tutor or a big brother. He told me, frankly, that he had not paid attention to the State Board of Education until the time of his nomination. At the same time, Deborah Pignatelli had 2 local Nashua citizens who have shown deep commitment to public education. They both are Black women. And then there's a third Black woman who applied on her own, again, deeply steeped in public education. Sununu won't even interview the three women. He put forward this guy, the first time he put forward a person of color in, I think, the first 38 or 39 months of his term. It's really clear this is cynical politics.
Sounds like pandering.
And the people like Sununu who are calling me out as a racist because I didn't support this candidate have been absolutely silent about Trump. And
interesting. So I just don't. It seems like such a transparent. Like, why would he bother doing such a transparent stunt? Because it doesn't seem like there's any genuine interest in diversifying his leadership, and to then decide to diversify it without, like, don't the people deserve skilled, passionate people? And the people understand that. All people understand. Like, if you're going to have somebody in a position, you want them to want to be there, not for their own personal gain, but for the gain of the people.
Well, for me, the most important screen when I consider a nominee for a position is this person committed to the mission of the agency he or she is being appointed to?
Because if a candidate has all the skill sets needed for upper management and to critical thinking and all those things, they could segue into, I don't know enough about this candidate's professional background, but you could make the argument that they could use those skills that they were passionate about in something else and transfer it over. But do you believe that that's the case?
Yeah, actually, Deb Pignatelli and I recommended that this young man, he's a younger guy, be considered for some of the business-oriented boards that the state has because he has some business experience. The other thing is he has no board governance experience. So we're going to throw him into the most complex board the state has at a time when public education is under attack. It just made no sense to me. The Business Finance Authority is a really strong business board. He'd be appropriate there because of his experience and commitment to business issues. So I think this was a setup. People are starting to understand that. It took a little while to get there.
So are you tainted by the scream of racism? I always find it's a technique lately. I am something, and thus I will accuse my opponent of being that thing. I find that odd.
Let me say this. We haven't talked at length about my background. I've done death penalty work throughout the South for almost 40 years as the ACLU's counsel. I'm the one who blew up profiling in Manchester, police stopping young Black and brown people and taking their photos for no good reason. I'm the one who exposed that. I have a long history of being a committed ally. I've undergone implicit bias training. I would have my staff undergo implicit bias training if I'm elected governor. I actually have a very diverse campaign staff, unlike all of my opponents. I had to go out of state, but there's a young Black woman, my campaign manager is an Asian woman. My deputy for most of the campaign has been a queer person. Some of this is intentional, some of it's just who I know. And so I'm comfortable allowing people to draw their conclusions on whether I'm an ally or a racist.
Good. And they will. It's funny. It's not the thing that usually will make somebody vote for a candidate, but we're looking for differentiators between you and your opponents. And so I was wondering, do you have any, I'm afraid I don't know, Dan, your direct Democratic opponent's position on any of this. Do you have any info on that?
On any of the issues we've talked about?
No, well, yeah, I'm afraid that somebody will leave this show and not really see that, they'll see that Dan is the majority leader and is probably cranking through lots of laws and bills for the people. And I was wondering, does that put him in a stronger position for the governorship than you? And if you could give me.
We actually had a forum last night where he accused the executive council of sitting on the sidelines on a number of issues. And then I pointed out that I'm the one who stopped the appointment of the completely inexperienced environmental commissioner. I'm the one who kept the climate change denier off the group that approves all our big utility projects. I'm the one who led the fight and kept Gordon MacDonald from becoming the Chief Justice, given his history of strong, radical anti-choice positions over the course of the last 30 years. So legislators pass laws, executive counselors deal with confirmations and approval of contracts. It's a different approach. But when you think of the differences, there are three. Let's say first, we're both Democrats, and so there's a great deal of overlap. There's more that is in common than separates us. But the things that separate us are really important. So the first is the pledge. Dan is unequivocally taking the pledge, and he's following the Republican position that we should never talk about taxes. So that's number one. Second, Dan supports the Granite Bridge fracked gas pipeline. I oppose it. Third, there's a difference in how we're paying for our campaigns. There's something in New Hampshire called the LLC loophole. That is what Sununu uses to raise ungodly amounts of money from individuals who are able to circumvent the cap on donations because they're real estate developers who have multiple corporations, and each of those corporations is given another cap. So they contribute through their corporations. Sununu's mastered that art and needs to be called out on it. I refuse to take LLC loophole money. But my competitor, Dan, at the start of his campaign, from his own treasurer, who's a real estate developer, used the LLC loophole. And when he got caught, Dan had to return over $10,000. That's why Granny D's family, Larry Haddock, if you remember Granny D, has endorsed me. That's why Ben and Jerry have endorsed me, and they're naming an ice cream after me called Volinsky's Courageous Crunch. And it's about my campaign finance positions. Indeed, really? I met them a number of times, but I caught their eye when on tape, I tore up a $500 campaign check from a Fortune 100 company that just showed up in my mailbox one day. I don't know anyone at the company. I didn't ask for it. Didn't know really why I got it. And then 2 weeks later, a contract showed up on my desk that was for this company. And I was happy reviewing the contract on the merits. They're probably entitled to the contract. They were the best company at the lowest price, but they sent me a check for $500 because that's how cynical our system is. So I went on video and tore up the check, which I'll tell you, for a politician, that's pretty hard to do.
It's hard to do. But also they did it in the wrong order. If they feel like they're the most, if they actually honor themselves and feel like they're the best candidate for something,
they should go on the merits.
Yeah. And then eventually give you a donation,
Well, I wouldn't have taken it anyway because we don't take corporate donations. So here's what we've done. We smashed the record on the number of contributors to a gubernatorial race. We have more contributors to my race than any gubernatorial candidate has had in the primary and the general combined. So we have more than 8,400 by now.
I'm positive that people are, despite all the current shenanigans and health scare, people are worried about the environment, and many people are worried. And I feel like you probably have the environmental vote is my guess. That whole fracked pipeline, we did a fair amount of coverage on it simply because we reflect back, public access television just reflects back what the people are doing. And so there was a lot of, we represent Lebanon, the city of Lebanon and Hanover. And so there was a lot of concern there.
Yeah.
So bravo for you. I'm glad you gave us the differentiations. I was wondering, is there anything before we leave? Is there anything else you feel like we haven't talked about that you think is of importance for a viewer who's ready to vote?
Yeah, let me say one quick minute on biography, because I'm not the typical lawyer. I grew up in a mill town where the mill failed in eastern Pennsylvania. My dad was a mechanic and a maintenance man and a union shop steward. My mother a homemaker. I'm the only one in my family to go to college. I went on scholarship, and then I paid for law school by working as a carpenter. I've never forgotten where I came from. And the Claremont case, the work I've done as a public defender and as a death penalty lawyer are evidence of my commitment to social and racial justice. My wife, Amy, and I live in East Concord on a couple of acres. We have some animals, a goat named Scooter. We have 3 adult children who are pursuing careers in teaching and in social work. And our youngest works for a tech startup. We're really proud of them. And as I said, we're new grandparents for the second time. We have a 2.5-year-old grandson and an 8-week grandson. And I really do think about the future in terms of those children and those grandchildren. And I want what my children have enjoyed for every child in New Hampshire. So thank you for that opportunity.
I appreciate you personalizing. When we vote for somebody, you really have no sense of their character and their history. So thank you for sharing that with us, Andru. So good luck with your candidacy. It's only a few more months, and then if you win the primary, you go on to a tougher fight. Policy and ethics, I guess, it will be in the forefront. Yeah. So please stay healthy.
Yes, you too. And congratulations on the grandbaby.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. I love being a grandma. And for the viewers, thank you for watching another episode of A Closer Look. It's a show format where you can be the host. And you can interview anyone of interest to you. I'm sure you guys are probably tired of looking at my mug, so I would love some hosts and new guests. And in the meantime, I hope you all stay safe. Thank you for coming.
Take care. Bye-bye.